we always say this, right? People buy from people they like. People buy from people they trust. Ultimately, though, people buy from people who solve their problems.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 44 of Sales Stories in Real Life. I'm your host, Alex Bruschi, and this is the show where professional salespeople share their stories about memorable buying experiences. Today's guest, we have no other than Nikki Ivey. She has been in sales for over a decade, held every single position from SDR all the way up to CRO. She is a contributing writer for Sistas in Sales and an advocate for improving sales culture to try and make sales culture less toxic and more inclusive. Nikki, welcome to the show. This is so long overdue. I'm so glad that we get to do this. I'm really excited for your story. I got to hear a little sneak preview before we started recording here, and this is going to be really, really awesome because this one is highly relatable, especially for a lot of our females out there. So I hear you had a really interesting experience when you were going for a pedicure. What happened there, Nikki?
Well, hi, first of all. So here's the thing. I go to this same local nail spot. It's my version of, like Cheers, right? Where everybody knows my name. I I walk in and it's like, hey, Nikki, here's our glitter girl. Because I never leave the nail salon without glitter on some part of my fingers or toes. So anyway, I love this place. Let's start with that. But when I would go to get my pedicures every single time, the woman doing my nails would say, hey, you should actually upgrade to the gel polish, right? She said this just about every time. I know you like colors. I know you like sparkles, she would say. And we have just a more variety of that if you would get the gel polish. But for me, right, I'm saying no every time politely. No, I'll just go with the regular. Right? Now, I was doing that because there's a charge, right? There's a charge to upgrade from the regular nail polish to the gel polish. And so I thought I was saving money, right? But again, I was coming every 2 weeks. And this person that kept asking me when I think about the things that she was emphasizing, right? AKA the things that she at that time thought I identified as the problem, right? Which is, she was talking about the features of the gel polish, the pretty bells and whistles, right? All the sparkles, all the different colors. But because I wasn't speaking the price objection, it hadn't occurred to her to take that angle. So one day, a light bulb must have gone off for her, and she just asked me, she says, I notice you come in here every 2 weeks, right? And you get the regular polish. Did you know that if you had gotten gel the last 2 times you visited us, you actually would have saved money? So now she's figured out that I was wrong about what my problem actually was, and that she was just going along with it because she thought that. So it was like this importance of asking deeper questions and not being afraid to challenge people the way she challenged me, right? Like, no, here's the evidence, you're losing, right? And what I felt when she did that was like she was doing me a favor. It sunk in that people are often grateful when you've given them information that they didn't have, especially if that information is telling them how they lost. And so, that whole experience, of course, it inspired me. Of course, I'm back on the sales floor trying to challenge people on what their problems are. Now, I can't, as far as making a system out of this, I can't take full credit, right? Anybody that's been looking at Beck Holland's Flip the Script content, this is that. So I got obviously super excited when I saw that. I was like, oh my God, it's me. But that's what this experience taught me. And I see that a lot. I look for these things, right? If I'm going to, and that's what you all do on this show, right? You tell these kinds of stories, right? The perfume kiosk, the Verizon, right? When I go get and what it always comes down to is asking the right question.
This is fantastic. Well, first off, you're an amazing storyteller. I had so many questions I was going to ask, and you kind of preemptively answered them. But I still have plenty more. Don't worry, we're not done just yet. So here's what's really fascinating about this all is one thing that I really want to dig into right away is that obviously as sellers we talk about status quo, and your status quo or the person at the nail salon, their status quo was you were coming in 2 weeks, right? Everyone there knew you. There was a sense of community. So by upselling you this gel manicure that lasts longer, she almost took more money out of her pocket as opposed to you just coming in every 2 weeks, right? So I think that's really interesting because on paper, let's just say it may look like a silly decision, right? Why wouldn't you just let her keep coming in every 2 weeks, right? Yada yada. But now they've got an incredible advocate in you, right? And they've got an incredible evangelist, right? And I'm sure you probably tip better, right? And all these things. So what would you kind of say to the salespeople out there? Let's say that maybe sometimes sales decisions don't make sense on paper, but doing right by the customer in the long run is better than just kind of those short-term numbers, let's just say.
So long run is the operative phrase there that you just used. What we have all learned and continue to be seeing evidence of is that as things go wrong for businesses, right? As the economy blindsides people, one of the first things that goes away is buyers' trust in salespeople. There's a lot of evidence out there, right, to support the fact that that is something that wanes and decreases year after year. And so two things happen. That makes it really difficult to break through in cold outreach, even if you are excellent at it. So it leaves an imperative to nurture relationships so that when this happens, you can go to people who trust you, right? Whose peers trust them. And these relationships will be how you move forward, first of all. And then second of all, that building trust piece in the moment is how this woman got the upgrade. It's just like you mentioned, right? She knew that this wasn't the thing that was going to make her the most money in the moment, but she also understood that this now means that when my family comes to visit, we're all going there and getting the gel polish. You feel me? Like, you know what I'm saying? And that's how we need to think about what we do as sellers.
Well said, because as you were saying that, the key standout there is trust, right? Like you can create revenue, right? You can close deals, right? ABC. But if you don't have that trust piece, you're just constantly almost living deal by deal, right? Like you constantly need people to come through for you. And so as you were saying that, I had kind of posed the question of, hey, she's doing something that makes her less money. But as you were talking about trust, kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, hey, what if one of your friends went to another nail salon and they got a gel manicure, right? And they said, hey, instead of lasting a few days, this is lasting me a few weeks. Sure, you have your little community there and your whole cheers thing going on, but there was a potential that, you could have been swayed elsewhere. So by kind of building that trust, now they've got a customer out of you for life. And I wanted to actually go back to kind of the question that broke it all open, because obviously she had tried to sell you before, right? Oh, we have these different colors, right? And you put it perfectly, sort of the bells and whistles, right? The features. Oh, hey, look, our product could do this. Look, your nails are going to look so shiny, right? And obviously, there's going to be glitter involved regardless. But it really wasn't until she said, I'm paraphrasing here, I'm trying to quote you exact, but she said to you, did you know that if you used the gel instead, you wouldn't have to come back as often, right? It wasn't, oh, hey, have you thought about the gel that I mentioned to you last time? Or, hey, have you ever talked to friends that have gel manicures, right? It was a very pointed question, right? Like,
right. what she did more effectively even than what you, before she even got to that point, maybe I forgot to mention it, is she simply asked me why. That is what she had been missing before. Because like I said, I wasn't stating out loud that the cost of the upgrade was the problem, which, holla if you hear me. If you are a salesperson, you likely have been in a sales conversation where you get this email that's like, no, we're not going to go with you all. And then you ask why at that point, and they're like, it's budget. And I'm like, you never told me, what I'm saying? And now you've lost it, mostly because you didn't ask why. You assumed that this cookie cutter fit the value prop. You forgot about the conversation these people are having with your competitors, right? You are certainly not the first and only salesperson they're going to speak to, right? And so that's that retention and vulnerability piece that you just mentioned, right? Like what happens when somebody has more sparkles in their nail polish? You know what I mean? And so that is what it is. Or, if I hadn't spoken that the price was the true objection, well, then it would just take for somebody else to do that. For somebody, I'm driving by, I see an advertisement says, full set and pedicure for X amount. And then I'm like, wait a minute, that's cheaper than what I get. You could lose me that way. They won't lose me that way because I love them. And isn't that the point? You know?
So this is really juicy. Let's pull on this thread a little bit because you hit on something that I think is probably very prevalent in the B2B sales world right now, which is the hidden objection, right? So let's talk to our sellers that maybe the exact situation that you described, right? They're in deal cycles, they've already kind of communicated the price up front and they say, oh, hey, sorry, we don't have the budget, right? And you can kind of sense like, okay, I don't have the real reason, right? So that's obviously a sign that you haven't dug deep enough. What kind of advice would you give to our sellers that are seeing a lot of that, right? Like, what are some of the ways that you could peel back the layer of the onion a little bit in the sales process to make sure that you're getting to that hidden objection? Because I'd be pretty confident saying that just about today, every single sales process, there's going to be a hidden objection there. And it's obviously up to you to go and dig it out or not. What kind of advice would you give to folks that are having trouble digging in?
When I wasn't digging in, when I was having trouble with that, for me, it came down to confidence. It came down to a mindset. It came down to this position that sellers often feel as the subordinate in these conversations. We go into the conversation wanting so badly to please them so that they buy from us that we lose our authority and we lose our power. And you have to have that authority to be able to say to someone, hey, did you know you're losing? Without sounding like you're calling them dumb, right? You were saying this as an expert. So the confidence piece was what had to change first. And that meant, right, once I overcame that meant that when I do get, right, this message that says, hey, it's budget, now I have the confidence and the authority to challenge that. So the way I describe this is mindset, moxie, magic. That's what it takes, right? Mindset is that confidence piece, that belief that if you just keep moving forward, good things will happen, right? Moxie is having the gumption to do things like challenge people. And magic is, of course, showing up as yourself. So doing all of these things in a way that feels, authentic and true to you. And what that looks like in this process is simply saying, hey, I get it. But usually when someone says to me that the price is too high, what they mean is that I haven't shown them the value, right? The value, not just the value of the product, because you can see that everywhere, right? I can regurgitate that to you, but the value in making a change. And that value, as in this example, you have to be able to quantify it. And once you know you can do that, right, it feeds itself. Now I have the confidence. I can confidently ask, if I'm this pedicurist, I can confidently ask everybody now who doesn't do the upgrade. I can ask them why. And I'm confident to do that because I have an answer that will help them. That's what it has to be. I mean, folks, we always say this, right? People buy from people they like. People buy from people they trust. Ultimately, though, people buy from people who solve their problem. And then when you solve those people's problem, they go tell their friends that you solved their problem, which is infinitely more powerful and valuable to you as a seller than that same referral saying, "Oh, I had such a fun experience with Nikki. I liked Nikki so much. She was so fun to buy from." But like, did she build you more pipeline though? Like that's the loop you gotta close. And as this industry moves forward and as what it means to be an elite seller evolves, that full cycle confidence and willingness to really find out what the problem is and make it your mission to solve it, even if it means challenging the perceptions of the person that you're sitting across from. Listen, that's how we keep our jobs. That is the imperative right now. And it's also how we keep genuine relationships.
Reach. That was gold. No, seriously, Nikki, that was gold. You did so much there that I want to make sure we highlight because that was a really, really good clip right there that we're definitely going to grab. But first off, you started off with confidence. And I think that's key because I really do believe that most sellers know that they need to challenge when necessary, that they need to ask those questions to kind of peel back that layer of the onion. But there's that layer of fear of, oh, well, what if I insult them? Or, oh, what if they don't want to buy from me anymore because I question them? So that confidence really is step one and not spoken about enough. And then the example that you gave, I love what you did, is that you fall on the sword for the client, right? You say, hey, I must not have shown you the value, right? Not, hey, you really aren't understanding this. How can I re-explain it, right? You're falling on the sword yourself to let them save face, but you're still challenging them, but you're also kind of taking the blame. You're kind of shouldering the blame at the same time. So that I think is a stroke of brilliance right there because you're giving them the space to still be right while also challenging them. So let's pull on that thread for a little bit. Let's say someone is kind of having issues knowing when to challenge or how to challenge, right? Like, what would say maybe be some steps that you think people could take to start to take that progress and really start to peel back the layers of the onion on their sales calls?
I tend to write these questions down before I go into the conversation and not simply the, hey, what did I miss question, but the kinds of questions that are more likely to uncover that to begin with, right? So beyond what is your budget, you've got to understand what the economic impact on not just the business, but on the individual that you're talking to is of inaction. That is the biggest piece. When deals stall, it is because people have generally defaulted back into the status quo. When you tell them how the status quo is hurting them, you can move them. Can I give another quick example?
Please.
So say I own a retail store and it's at a place where, heavy foot traffic. And outside of my retail store, I've got a sign and the sign is burnt out or it's ugly or it's broken and things like this, right? I haven't paid to fix the sign because who cares, right? Like, if I'm doing my business and I'm making the money I want to make, right? The business is afloat. Why would I invest in the sign? So then here comes the sign seller, walks into this retailer, says, hey, did you know your sign is broken? And then the seller's like, status quo, right? Shrug. Sure, I knew that. You got signs to sell? I'm not interested in signs to sell because I'm just fine with mine. I make what I want to make. Here's where you win them. You come prepared and you say something like, well, did you know that this intersection gets X amount of foot traffic, right? It sounds like you're telling me you're getting all the foot traffic that you want or can handle. But did you know that this research shows that when the sign, right, resonates, when the sign is eye-catching, it increases foot traffic by this much. Then just let it stand. Just let them sit with that. And now they're going to ask you a question. They're going to want you. Now you have in an instant proven that you know something that they do not. And you're not asking them to trust you off top. You're asking them to look at the facts. And you're talking to them like, notice this sign seller hasn't mentioned any features of the signs they sell because it doesn't matter. There could be another sign seller who has way prettier signs, more glitter, right? Way prettier signs, and they can do this and they can do that. But if that's what they come in selling, then this I'm not interested because my sign is doing just fine person is going to tell them no in a very like real and I would say at this point, obvious way. This approach of coming in with expertise, which for a lot of people listening might mean flipping the paradigm, flipping the attitude and energy with which they go into these conversations. That's what it's gonna take. I don't say that believing that it's easy to do. It took me a few jobs, a few failures, you know what I'm saying? A few no's that I felt like could have been yeses in order to build that confidence. But, you know, when I did that, the losses didn't hurt as bad, right? Because the losses hurt when they hurt the most, when you know you didn't do your absolute best. And the losses hurt when it feels personal. And it feels personal when people are not upfront with you, right? Then our brain starts to go, what did I do wrong? What did I say? Which is why that works when I phrase the follow-up the way that I mentioned. But I mean, yeah, that's any example I can think of is going to come down to that, right? That I showed them information that they didn't know. I did not try and push them to love me or love the thing I was selling. I allowed them to come to this understanding on their own. And then there I was to guide them to a decision that was going to make sense for them.
Well, first off, thank you for blessing us with a 2-for-1. That story was a perfect example. And one more thing that I want to touch on that you said before the story that I really loved is you talked about the incentives of the business and the incentives of the person, right? Those are two really key distinctions because you can show somebody something that's going to be great for the business, right? You can satisfy that business incentive 10 times over, but folks still might not make a change because they may not be personally incentivized in that aspect of the business. So making sure that you're hitting those 2 points is absolutely key. Nikki, this has been absolutely fantastic. Let's get one more takeaway for the people here. We've got a lot of B2B sellers that are listening to the show. Folks that are still listening, we thank you for staying with us. If you can give one takeaway, right? If folks are going to have one big takeaway that they get from this episode, what would that be?
I think the intersection of the things we've been talking about add up to the importance of a multi-thread approach when you're selling. That's what they add up to. That's actually why I mentioned that value to the individual. So say it again in that sales example, if I'd gone in and said, hey, foot traffic has increased. Well, if I'm not the person who's accountable for foot traffic, then you still didn't win me. So I would have had to know that. I would have had to talk to, you know, the person at the counter who's incentivized on, you know, how much money they make in a day and things like that. So just knowing those things, take the multi-thread approach, take it from the very beginning of your outreach. Do not only connect with 1 or 2 economic decision makers, right? It will lead you down the wrong road. And it also doesn't do anything for you when it comes to building trust. So in these examples, we have looked at, you know, how to draw someone's attention to an idea that they maybe didn't think of. And we've looked at how to then give them the evidence that you can solve their problem. Do that for each person that engages with whatever the problem is that your product solves.
Perfect. That's I'm not even going to say anything else because you put that perfectly as is. Nikki, we talked a whole lot about all that you're working on. You're obviously doing your work for Sisters in Sales. You're obviously doing a lot of work to change the culture and inclusivity of sales. Heck, you've got a whole bookshelf full of awards over there. So why don't you plug some with the audience before we jump?
Yeah, actually, you're in luck, listeners. No, I'm doing a lot of projects that have to do with helping people improve business processes and then a little content as well. But I'm actually on the market for a full-time role. So if you like what you have heard, and you'd like to see what it looks like for someone like me to apply this approach at your company, holla at your girl. Other than that, please do um, follow along with what I'm doing on LinkedIn. I share content that I hope is helpful to people. And and I like making new friends. So
Connect with Nikki on LinkedIn, follow Nikki on LinkedIn. If you're a hiring manager, give Nikki a call, send her a message. She is as great as it gets, as you can tell from the insights from just this episode alone. Nikki, thank you for all that you do for the community. Thank you for joining us today. This has seriously been an absolute blast. Know the people are going to love this one. Sales Stories in Real Life fam, we will see you next week. Cheers.